Jenna, thank you so much. I won't talk too much today. I had a really nice chat with Sarah about a week ago about the presentation, and she was amazing to remind me that presentation means you can do whatever you like to do. Which was great because I think, Jordan and I have been sharing really fantastic exchange for the last month, kind of in various states of freaking out, I think, about what we're doing. So I'll just speak very briefly, and then Maja and I would like to share something. And as Jenna and I got into this conversation a little bit online, we both agreed that it might be nice, given how much we've been having presentations and exactly where we are in the order of the festival events, to have a little bit more time for a Q&A at the end of this. So I'll run the presentation a little bit shorter. I've been listening quite intently to the other presentations, particularly when mentions of sound have come up. The first that really did quite strike me was when Norbezi was speaking about the acquiescence in silence. It's something that I've been thinking a lot about, different ways in which we define or think about silence. So this was something that was a bit of a new turn for me, and I liked that coming up. Again, I was quite taken with Fred's poem about Echo Lake and kind of building this sonic architecture in how the sound was spaced. And as well, it was very generous for Lisa to share a brief conversation about her sound or noise tourism, walking through recording different spaces. That resonated with me. I too have been doing similar kinds of practices, though mostly less in cities and more in non-city spaces. Though I suppose if also working with Lisa's very interesting to me, very intriguing notion of we-ness as a formation of city, that in fact I'm in a city somehow everywhere I'm going. The last 2 years I've been quite blessed to travel a lot because of the generosity of something called the Chalmers Arts Fellowship. I've spent my time working in Toronto, which is where I'm from, and also living in Ghent, Belgium, working with Maja Jantar and living with her when I'm there, and also living and working in Reykjavik, Iceland. During this time, traveling and working, and kind of displacing my body within different cultures and languages, I've come to a much kind of quieter and more listening space, I think, in some ways, and questioning space too, and a space of kind of immediate reaction as well. I've been quite invested in improvisation practices, both vocal as well as contact improvisation, which is a form of movement practice that came around in the 1970s by two American dancer choreographers. I've also been very interested in acoustic ecology, which also came around in the 1960s and 70s, and it's a study that was, I think the term first came from R. Murray Schafer, who is a Canadian composer, and he was at the time, I think, teaching at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, and he came up with the World Soundscape Project. He's written some quite cogent and for me, necessary reading books on acoustic ecology, as well as sound and music education. And because we've had the opportunity to have so much monologue and listening going on, I thought maybe we'd take a moment to listen collectively in what Murray Schafer would call an ear cleaning exercise. So what I'd like to invite everybody to do is to open your ears and listen with attention to what is immediately around us here. We'll take a couple of minutes to do that now. You can close your eyes if you like, if you don't have to. Okay. What did you hear? Anybody, what did you hear? The lights, yeah. What kind of sound were they making? Yeah, that's interesting. You're in a slightly different soundscape than I am here because I can't hear the lights. I think that makes a bit of sense, though. Yeah. Or maybe I can hear my computer buzzing a bit more. Yeah. What else did you hear?
Personal tinnitus.
Yes. Yeah. It's interesting. So where Adina could hear something like further out, yeah, you're very
in.
yeah. Heating system. Yeah. Is it something that you normally notice, Bob?
Here,
Yeah.
yes.
Asher?
Somebody's belly growled. Someone's hungry.
Yes. Yes. That's such an intimate thing to notice, but also be, there's somehow an invitation to notice that. I think it's interesting. We're in this space together, and we've been, kind of actively filling this space with thought and language for the last 2 days. So it's kind of interesting to see exactly what this cocooned space is and what sounds are coming in from outside and what is informing our time together. Thank you for doing that with me. Last March, I set out again to head towards Belgium for the start of this last year's Chalmers experience. En route to Belgium, I took a week stopover in Iceland, and I've had this kind of, fairly long-running agreement with myself that when the next time there's a volcanic eruption in Iceland, I will go there because I've been researching Icelandic volcanology. So it was quite an interesting piece of luck to find myself on March 19th at a Peaches concert that I was supposed to be reviewing, receiving a text message from the editor of the newspaper saying, "Eyjafjallajökull," and I'm like, what the fuck is that? Like, okay, awesome, okay. So, and then somehow not able to focus on the concert because I'm like, I want to go see I want to go get near the volcano somehow. Which the next day I did have the opportunity to do. And that was pretty neat. We got about 1 kilometer away, which we were surprised that we could get so close because it was still quite unsure what was going on. But 2 days after that, I did continue on my trek, went to Belgium with Maja, and we both got quite caught up in following the volcanological news that was happening online. I think for the first 3 weeks that we were together, 4 weeks, I was spending up to 8 hours a day researching and kind of following the different threads of the information that was coming out through Icelandic media, people that we know there, as well as different news sources from around the world, and particularly some volcanologist bloggers, both amateur and professional. It's very interesting to follow that. Of course, the Eyjafjallajökull eruption has been one of the most talked about things to come out of Iceland recently in the news, but also the Kreppa, the financial collapse of October 2008, is another one of the recent things to come around. And as Maja and I were working together, we started kind of collecting things that she was working on, things that I was working on, researching actual objects we were creating and thoughts. And we ended up starting to go into and create a text that used the word Orowe as its title. Orowe is an Icelandic word that means unrest, and I understand that it can mean both a political unrest as well as seismic activity, harmonic tremors, the kind of earthquake activity that can happen around eruptions. So Maja and I thought it might be an interesting venture to share Orowe in its raw state where it's at right now. It is a multimedia or multidisciplinary project that has some preconceived and created components as well as improvised components within it. And yeah, we're still figuring out exactly what we're doing with it. So we'd like to try it. Okay, we're gonna set up yet again, always with the setting up. And Maya and I had a quick tete-a-tete right before this started, and I mean, we're so completely honored and blessed to be here and to have been invited to such an exceptionally curated event. Sarah, thank you. Everybody involved in creating the event, thank you. And in particular, to be in the same kind of time space as Jordan's brilliant presentation means a lot to us, and the opportunity to resonate with that with this particular piece. And the last thing I think that I'll say about this is there's a court case going on right now in Iceland that deals with 9 people who are alleged to have made an attack on Parliament during the protests,
revolution.
Yeah, and it seems pretty. I don't know. Well, we support the Reykjavik 9. Yes. Y- yeah. Yeah.
And
Y- y- y-
and
yes.
and yes.
Yes.
And
Yes.
and
And
yeah.
and
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
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 And yeah. Yeah. And
Yes.
Y- yeah. Yow.
Och.
Yow. Oh.
Och.
Yow. Oh. 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 Yow. Oh.
Ja. Ja. Au. Och. Och. Ja. Au. Nee.
Nee. Oh.
Och. Och. Nee.
Nee. Oh.
Nee.
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 Or. No. Or. Nay. Or. No. Or no. Or no. Or no. Or no. Or no.
Yes. The mouth is a river.
Mouths are so furious. There is water running. 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 Water runs. 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 One woman and her mouth on my mouth and my mouth on her mouth and her mouth on my mouth and my mouth over her mouth and her mouth over my mouth, and I come in her mouth and I come out of her mouth. There is so much blood in this eruption. Thank you.
Thank you.
So,
I was wondering if, I'm curious if, well, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the relationship of the score to the sounds that we were hearing, and if you think of that as a score, if a piece like this could exist solely as an audio experience, say a recording, and connected to that, to what degree do you see what you're doing is connected to music?
thank you for the questions. The score that we were working with is a line drawing that Maja has been creating as a series for some time now. I don't know if maybe you want to share it a little bit so people can see what it looks like.
Of course.
This was one of these very, very fascinating objects or things that we were working with. I found quite fascinating when we were in Belgium together. Some nights Maja would lay out her pages or her books, and she would sit and draw, and I would be sitting and doing things like editing video or whatever. Yep. Yep. So initially Maja had been working on these, and she has exhibited them in different forms in the past. And yeah, this was one of the pieces that we're starting to fit together in this project that we're working on for Oroway. Yeah. And we did start to work with it as a score at one point, a score for improvisation, vocal improvisation. And the first time that we performed this as a score was in Ghent, Belgium, at the Logos Foundation, which is quite a fantastic place
Yes,
of
absolutely.
people coming into town and brilliant thinkers there. And we worked with, I think, 7 people in total who performed the score with us.
At that point, we would ask everybody to do one improvisation and try to remember it, and do it again. And we would kind of line up, like the 7 of us, and repeat the improvisations one after the other, which is, of course, almost impossible to remember your improvisation exactly. So there was a nice shift.
Yeah, and then we had
Around there.
a third instruction along with that, was that after you had gone once through with an improvisation and then attempted to replicate that second pass with your improvisation, then you could, at the third pass through, insert yourself anywhere along the space and attempt to replicate just that little
Just
bit,
a
like
little
whatever
bit of
was, most kind of intriguing to you in those spaces.
But we've also performed it like with 3 performers, and each one has 1 score. So there are so many possibilities with this.
Yeah, absolutely. Jenna, I might ask you to help us a little bit more, because I know that you asked a multi-part question.
So I was asking, could this piece exist just as an audio recording, and to what degree do you consider what you're doing connected to music?
I think that it could definitely exist as an audio recording. I mean, it's quite, in the sense that we could certainly record it, and there it is. It's an audio recording. I think there's a little bit the kind of the so what factor, or the why factor of it existing in that particular way might be a question that Maja and I would pose to ourselves. I mean, cool to have a thing floating and offered and shared, but also I don't know, having some care around.
Well, it is conceived as having those different layers, and those layers interact with each other. So
Yeah.
it would lose if it were just a sound recording.
Yeah, it could lose, or the question could also be, I guess, what residue is carried through or still existent within just like a partially like excerpted thing as well somehow. Yeah, and relationship to music.
Yeah, I mean, I asked that question just because it seems like there's a great deal of theater in these pieces that you're doing. I mean, just the stage picture itself communicates so much.
Yep.
But again, in trying to understand the vocabulary that this is part of, I keep thinking of music. So I'm just wondering where the contact points are with the music world.
Certainly, both Maja and I have had an active education in music practices, and kind of do flux at times between like perhaps existing within like a poetry frame or context, as well as a visual art frame or context, or insert whatever label or frame you might want to put around what it is that we're doing in some ways. I do think that, you know, the act of getting up and presenting in certain ways, like there's theatricality in doing that. You get up and you give a presentation, you choose to read your presentation, you choose to improvise your presentation, whatever it is you're doing something that is performative in that you're making choices in what you're doing, in how your
Physicality as well.
your physicality, what visual you're with, whether or not you're cognizant of how you are, being identified with the text that you're delivering or sharing, or what it is you're doing.
And poetry and music are so closely linked anyway.
Yeah. I've been personally quite intrigued. I mean, by like the gesture that we had with looking at each other for quite a while. Jeff, you were mentioning earlier today. Perhaps being with a sense of social sincerity in some ways, and I've been particularly taken by improvise, but also a couple of Buto practitioners in Toronto who do often use lengthy eye contact with audience members. And I know you and I shared that moment last night during performance when I locked eyes with you, and we had a moment of like, okay, who's going to look away? Because it got a little bit uncomfortable. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, these coming in, they may seem extra literary as gestures to be doing, but maybe it's a gesture to trouble, again, what are we, why and what and how are we labeling as the poetic gesture, the musical gesture. And I know that there's nothing new at all, and I don't know that I have any real interest in newness in some ways as well, but yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I had a question. Sorry, do you? It was actually also coming off of what Jeff did, and the slight, the discussion that we were having around expressivity and emotion. I read expressivity a little bit as emotion. You sort of started to answer the question a little bit by alluding to Jeff, but it's interesting to me that this is abstract emotion, that especially this piece as opposed to the piece with words, that one reads it socially, one reads the voice tones, the female voice tones doing this. It's a kind of, sometimes you get the allusion to mourning or to or to grief or to sexuality or to a kind of peacefulness, like a liturgical peacefulness. All of this is being played with, and we comprehend it. We already have the social apparatus or the social learning to comprehend it. So somehow we are reading what you're doing as emotional and or expressive. And in other words, it's as if the debate about expressivity that we were having in poetry, where there's a little bit of push me, pull you, has been displaced to this artifact. And I wondered whether you could comment on that in relationship to this debate that seems to be at issue.
I'll say one brief thing that came to mind. I was quite taken with Eunoia as a project. It's been informative over the last almost decade, I guess, for the work that I do, and that has been informative in the same way that work with one of the voice teachers that I've had in Toronto, a woman named Fides Kruker, who's totally brilliant. Her work has been with me as well. And one of the things that she suggested when we were working together is that emotion is transmitted through the vowels. So this, partnered with Unoi as a poetic conceit, I find pretty intriguing. Us working with long tones, of course, we're playing vowel sounds as well.
Overtones.
And-
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's interesting. It's also interesting, like the notion that you use of reading. So you're also reading our bodies as we're reading other objects.
You're aware of the arc, the trajectory or the arc of the creation. In other words, it isn't just randomized, interaction. There are arcs of up and down,
It is
in other words,
structured, yeah.
emotional curves, as we used to, something like that.
Yeah.
So this whole poetic seems to be orthogonal to a resistance to expressivity and emotion in artwork. Yet that's what I'm interested in your comments on it. I'm not trying to cause fights, actually, far from it. No, how can you say this, Bob Perlman?
I can speak for myself here. When I produce these sounds, I'm exploring the material. I'm exploring the color, where the voice is placed, how to make them not be a scream or
Very controlled. Yeah.
a cry or something literal.
But of course,
But-
there's an awareness that
Of course. But on the other hand, it's just that we place with the audience, in a way. It's what you hear in it, not necessarily what we
I
want.
understand that,
Mhm.
but still, there's a social learning that allows
Mhm.
us to read what you're doing
True.
as an outcry or a sadness or a kind of, that's what all, there's a collective sense.
And it depends so much on the moment. That's the other thing.
Assisting your achievement, actually.
Maybe, but
well,
at least for me, when I improvise in this way with the line or with just sound, it depends on the atmosphere. It depends on what is happening in the audience. It depends on the other person. All these little things change the whole atmosphere in a way. But this is my personal experience.
I'll add or speak to that.
Yeah.
One more question and then we'll check.
Do you mind if I answer that very quickly before? Thank
course.
you. I know for myself, I first came to sound and text-based practices when I was studying at York University, and I encountered Steve McCaffrey at an automatiste performance doing Claude Coffreau work, and that totally blew my mind. I'd never seen anything like that, and I mean, it really, it was as straightforward as I hadn't heard somebody make non-semantic sounding before, and that really impacted me. Like, I went through so many different emotions in that particular space, right? Like, I wanted to laugh, I was embarrassed, and then I wanted to cry. I was like, holy shit. I then went and studied with him in a couple of courses at York, which were quite neat. The particular lecture that he gave on sound poetry was fascinating to me, and at the end of that particular lecture, I asked him with the class if he could share names of female practitioners of sound poetry, because as a 21-year-old, I was quite keen to experience that work, and it had not been within the lecture itself, and he was not particularly in a place where he was forthcoming with names. Yeah. So that was That was intriguing to me because, of course, I had been experiencing, and quite eagerly, in my teens, like total Tori Amos devotee, and really into Björk and whatnot. So, I was finding things within that intrigued me. Ways in which the female voice was being used. That was, of course, beautiful and soothing, whatever, but also like really fucking disturbing. Yes. And that I craved, and I know like Maja and I connected like that as soon as we could get to like really dark and disturbing sounds, and a lot of the people's works that we have tended to gravitate towards, which I may or may not put under the guise or within the frame of sound poetry, probably wouldn't necessarily put themselves there, or that might have influenced or informed my research or education within a sound poetry practice. They probably wouldn't necessarily put themselves there, and or they might not even know that sound poetry exists. People like Tanya Tagak-Gillis, Inuit throat singer, Diamanda Galas, brilliant, innovative jazz, etc. American musician, Meredith Monk, and yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.